How does a character go from the goofy comic relief to arguably the main character of the universe?
Better Call Saul!
Breaking Bad was a high bar to reach, but not only did Better Call Saul live up to its predecessor, for some, it surpassed it. After 6 seasons and 63 episodes, the show proved itself to be just as much a powerhouse as Breaking Bad. But at one point, it was a huge risk that came with a lot of skepticism. Would this show tarnish Breaking Bad's reputation? Would it live up to the hype? Or would it falter and fail before it ever got off the ground? This is the origin story of how Better Call Saul came to be. Going into season 2 of Breaking Bad, co-creators Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould knew they wanted to create a character that could bring some levity to the show. Someone who was specifically there to be the comic relief.
We knew we wanted a character who was a bit of a clown.
Gould is the one that thought of the character of Saul Goodman, and he and Vince both knew early on that they wanted Bob Odenkirk to portray him. They loved his work on Mr. Show, a 1995 sketch comedy series where, ironically, in one of the sketches, Bob plays an undercover cop who busts the drug dealer. It's a good thing they had him in mind too, because before Vince came calling, Bob was on the brink of bankruptcy. He was struggling to get work and was taking any job offered to him just to stay afloat. His agent called and told him he was going to get offered a role on Breaking Bad, and that he absolutely had to take it. He called his friend right afterwards to ask him about the show, since he had never seen it.
I called a friend as soon as my agent hung up and I said, "Have you ever heard of this show Breaking Bad?" And he said, "It's the best show on TV. You have to say yes to that. Whatever they ask you to do, say yes."
Given his financial situation, he was going to take the role regardless, but this conversation gave him a boost of confidence. He was offered the job without an audition, and it was on the plane ride to Albuquerque that he first watched an episode of Breaking Bad. And during his first ever conversation with Vince Gilligan, he pitched what he thought Saul's hairstyle should be.
He said, "I really think Saul Goodman should have kind of a mullet, you know, business in the front, party in the back." That's what he wanted.
He laughed and he said, "That sounds awesome."
Saul Goodman was never meant to be anything more than a vessel for brief comic relief. So how did he come as far as getting his own show? Well, it all started as a big joke. Odenkirk's first film scene with Bryan Cranston's Walter White was a big monologue where we get some classic Saul. When it was over, a crew member joked, "Can I get a job on the sequel?" And after that, the joke kept running.
Whenever we came up with something that was too silly or just weird to go on to Breaking Bad, we'd say, "Oh, we'll do that for the Saul Goodman spinoff," and it was a joke.
Yeah.
But as the series continued, Bob gave a depth and personality to the character that they didn't intend. And as Bob crafted the character with each passing scene, the idea of a spin-off became less and less of a joke as they became more and more fascinated with Bob's performance.
Bob fleshed out a character who was originally intended to be kind of flat and two-dimensional.
Things started getting really serious towards the end of Breaking Bad's run. One day, Vince Gilligan asked Bob if he thought there was a show in the character. Vince told him he thought there was. So Bob replied, "If you think there is, I guess." Odenkirk later admitted that wasn't the truth.
I gotta be honest, I did not think so. Not at the time.
Vince and the others pushed forward with the idea. They finished Breaking Bad on a Friday and started work on Better Call Saul the next Monday. In April of 2013, Better Call Saul was confirmed in development to the public. Vince, Peter, and Bob had a ton of work to do, and they all agreed there was one crucial goal they had to achieve with the character of Saul.
We all agreed that the first thing they needed to do was make him likable, someone that you would root for.
They needed the perfect cast surrounding Saul Goodman to bring their vision to life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. They actually first needed Bob Odenkirk himself, which wasn't a sure thing. When Vince and Peter came to Bob to tell him the show was actually happening and they asked him to reprise his role, Bob said no. He thought it would be too tough on his family and didn't want to disappoint his kids.
I just can't do it. It's just they're 2 years too young. They were probably 14 and 12. So I just felt that I couldn't do it, so I said no.
His agent called him a few days after he turned down the initial offer, and they had a conversation where Bob explained his situation. What Bob didn't know is that his son overheard the phone call, and he asked his dad afterwards why he wasn't doing the show. Bob recounts the dialogue best.
And he goes, "Well, you're going to disappoint a lot of people." I said, "Well, I'm going to disappoint a lot of strangers." And he goes, well, some of them are my friends.
His son was extremely supportive of him doing the show, and later the same day, he had a conversation with his daughter as well, who also supported him reprising his role. So the next day, Bob went to call his agent, but the agent called him first and informed him that the offer had gone up, which worked out for Bob because, as he says,
I'm already gonna say yes!
Another main character from Breaking Bad that immediately carried over into Better Call Saul is the lovable Mike Ehrmantraut, a character that was never supposed to exist. His role as the cleanup guy following Jane's death was initially meant for Saul himself. Bob Odenkirk had signed on to do 4 episodes in season 2, but he couldn't shoot the 4th one because he had a commitment to How I Met Your Mother. So Vince and company created an entirely new character to fill the role. Vince and producer Tom Schnauz recognized Jonathan in his audition tape because they were both big fans of the show Wise Guy, starring Jonathan Banks. I think we can all agree that creating the character of Mike was for the best, and that Jonathan Banks is perfect for the role. Thank goodness Bob Odenkirk was busy being Artillery Arthur.
If you like Mike, thank How I Met Your Mother.
Kim Wexler is arguably just as important as Jimmy McGill to the story of Better Call Saul. How Ray Seahorn landed the role is one of the odder and more heartwarming stories I've ever heard. Seahorn never planned on auditioning for the show. She went in for an audition for Sneaky Pete, a crime drama series that, fun fact, was co-created by Bryan Cranston. This is probably why the casting director for the show was Sharon Bialy, who also cast Breaking Bad, and at the time was casting for Better Call Saul. Bialy said of Seahorn, "A lot of people pigeonholed her in the industry as a comedy actress, but I had an instinct she was so much more than that. An instinct that stemmed from 10 years of failed auditions that she got to experience firsthand." She and other casting directors would bring in Ray to audition for a wide variety of roles over the course of a decade, but Ray never booked any of them. However, that experience did help the casting directors affirm that she was the right choice for Kim Wexler. From the beginning, Sharon and Sherry, they told me it was my audition that booked me the role, but also them knowing a 10-year body of work of mine that no one had ever seen. It made me cry when they told me that, to hear, 10 years later, that all of it mattered. Before landing the role of Howard, Patrick Fabian was in a bit of a slump, not getting many auditions or parts. That was until he got an audition for Dog with a Blog, which made him question where he was at in his career.
Oh my God, has it become this? Dog with a Blog? And I mean, the dog is #1 on the call sheet in the show. And I was like, oh no.
He overcame his reservations and went in for the audition, where he almost walked out because of how ridiculous he found the whole situation. However, he quote, got over himself and went through with the audition, partly because casting director Carol Goldwasser was there and he didn't want to be disrespectful. Turns out the audition went great and he thought he nailed it and that there was no way he wasn't getting the job. He didn't get the job. But 2 weeks later, he got an audition for Better Call Saul. He thought if he couldn't land a role on Dog with a Blog, however, there was no way he was going to get a role on a show as big as Better Call Saul. So he went into the audition with the intention of getting cast on The Walking Dead, because it was the same casting director. However, Vince liked his audition, so he brought him in for another. And shortly after, Patrick was cast as the legendary Howard Hamlin. Michael McKean had an illustrious career before getting cast as Chuck. He won a Grammy, starred in several Broadway shows, had a short stint on SNL, worked with Vince Gilligan on an X-Files episode, and even worked with Bob Odenkirk previously on Mr. Show, where he played a condescending law professor. He also worked with Bryan Cranston on the Broadway show All the Way, which is where Bryan mentioned the character of Chuck to him.
We're about to go on, and Bryan turns to me and says, "You know, you should really play the brother. You should play Saul's brother in the prequel." I said, "What?" "I'll tell you later." And then we both make this entrance, and of course I can't think about anything else except what you just said to me, Bryan.
McKean was a huge Breaking Bad fan, so when Better Call Saul came a-callin', he did not hesitate to say yes. Michael Mando had not seen Breaking Bad before getting his role on the prequel. 2 weeks before his audition, however, he walked in on his dad watching the final 2 episodes of Breaking Bad. Mando started watching in the background and thought, God, this is good. He remembered the name Vince Gilligan from the credits, and when he went to his audition 2 weeks later, he saw Vince's name attached to it and knew it was something special.
I felt immediately like this is a really meaningful audition.
He had a bit of a hiccup when he realized his first audition tape didn't didn't have any sound, but he was able to record a new one in time and ultimately land one of the most underappreciated roles in the Breaking Bad universe. And just like that, Better Call Saul came to fruition, airing its first episode on February 8th, 2015. And if you don't know the rest, what are you waiting for? You know what you have to do.
Better Call Saul!